Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 2 of the Jimmy Tingle Show. I am Jimmy, and thank you all so much for joining us today. Today's theme in the first half of the show will be remembering Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I had the supreme honor of emceeing and performing at a fundraiser here in Boston for an AIDS benefit in 2007. A gentleman called me completely out of the blue, Mr. Stewart Ting Chong, who you'll be meeting shortly, called me out of the blue and asked me if I would consider being the MC and performer for this AIDS benefit with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So obviously I was blown away by the opportunity to perform and share the stage with the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And as a token of their appreciation, the organization, and Stewart in particular, sat my wife and I directly next to him during dinner before the show started. So it was so cool sitting next to him. He was so down to earth, so happy, so upbeat, considering all the things he had been through. He was not bitter. He was not angry. He was just happy and upbeat, and it seemed to me to be just really thrilled to be there, and was very grateful for the people of Boston coming together for this benefit. So I got to sit next to him, and I'm asking him about Mandela. I'm asking him about, the situation in South Africa. I'm asking him about the situation in America. And it was just wonderful to speak with them. And then I had to figure out, okay, what kind of material am I going to do that Archbishop Desmond Tutu will find amusing? So at the time, airport security was, all the rage because of the tragedy of 9/11. And it was very strict. And obviously, he's a world traveler. And my job is to keep the show moving, introduce people, and eventually introduce Archbishop Desmond Tutu as the keynote speaker. But while I'm doing the comedy portion of it, I'm saying, folks, can you believe airport security? Can you believe the questions they ask us? Did anybody give you anything to bring onto the plane? Huh? Don't look away. Look at me. All right, don't go anywhere. I got another question. Did you pack your bags yourself? Huh? Don't look away. Look at me. Did you? Did you pack them yourself? I'm thinking to myself, no, I didn't pack them myself. A stranger, a total stranger packed them. I could not believe the young man knew exactly what to bring. Now, I obviously always answer the questions in airport security seriously, but in my mind as a comic, I'm thinking, did these questions ever catch anybody? Ever? Did anybody ever say, oh, wait a second, wait 1 second. Now that you mention it, last night, about 11:15, I'm getting ready to turn in. The doorbell rings, and there stood a man I never met before. He says to me, I heard you're flying out in the morning. Why, yes, I am. Will you carry this on the plane for me? Carry this on the plane for you? I don't even know you. What are you going to do for me? Oh, I can pack your bags. So I'm doing this material on stage, and I can hear Archbishop Desmond Tutu cackling up a storm in the audience. He loved it because obviously he's flying all over the world, so he could really identify with it. And one of the things that I appreciated about him, he had a great sense of humor. Despite all the things that he had been through, he's in the audience, he's laughing up a storm, he's having a great time. His speech was very upbeat, and he talked about the gospel, and he talked about the people who are stricken with any kind of disease are really Jesus Christ in a very distressing disguise, and how we treat those people is how we would treat Jesus if he were here today. As the famous quote from the gospel, as you do to the least of these, you do unto me. So it's a very uplifting presentation. He galvanized everybody. Everybody in the audience was in awe of that he was actually there. And after he spoke, I got to talk to him and asked him to sign a book for me. And I had been carrying this book around for years. I got it in the early 90s. It's called A Testament of Hope. And it is a collection of the essays and all the speeches and essays of Martin Luther King Jr. And it is dedicated to Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the freedom struggle in South Africa. And there is a quote in here from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and I thought, how cool would it be if he were to sign this book, which he did. He signed the book, writes, God bless you, Desmond Tutu, September 2007. And it was just such an honor to meet him and to have him do that. And then after the show, after he signed the book, we all get on the elevator to go upstairs, to our hotel rooms. And my wife and I get on, and we bring our suitcases on, and he gets on, he brings his suitcases on, and he looks at me, and he looks at my bags, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Did you pack your bag yourself? Did you? Did you pack your bag yourself?" And everybody in the elevator cracked up laughing because they had all been in the show. And we rode the elevator up to the 8th floor where he was getting off, and the door opened, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu just disappeared into history, down the hall and into history. And it was a wonderful experience that I wanted to share with you folks tonight. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you in particular was I was so excited that I got to share the stage with this gentleman. I had asked Stewart, who we're going to meet momentarily, would Archbishop be kind enough to write a quote for me, for my resume, my bio. It helps you with credibility for other organizations. And so about a week later, I got an email from Archbishop Desmond Tutu as a quote that I could use in my resume. "Dear Jimmy, thank you so much for your performance and hosting the benefit last week. You were really great. I really enjoyed some of your jokes." Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Rest in peace and power, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, the man who made that encounter and really made that benefit such a success and reached out to me initially. I met him in 2007. We've become good friends since. He was on the communications team for Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Anti-Apartheid Movement in South Africa. Please welcome to the show the one and only, in the flesh, Mr. Stewart Ting Chong. Hello, Stewart. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Jimmy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And I hope that story brought back some pleasant memories.
It certainly did.
I'm very sorry for your loss. It was a terrible loss for the whole world when the Archbishop passed away a few weeks ago. But as you know, the legacy that he left behind was truly remarkable. Really, truly a historic figure who had provided, encouraged, and promoted and actually enacted lasting change, not only in South Africa, but in the entire world. When did you first meet the Archbishop, and what was your position then?
Well, Jimmy, I started working for the Archbishop in 1987. I was accepted to study for the priesthood, and at that time, it was during the Apartheid Era, where the media in South Africa were owned by the South African government and controlled by the South African government. So they use that as a source of misinformation, not unlike what's happening in this country with certain news agencies right now. And so there was a team set up, funded by a church in New York, and set up to actually provide a private communications network for Southern Africa, which covered Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Swaziland, and Lesotho. And I was responsible for setting up that network so that when the Archbishop issued a statement, the churches within Southern Africa would have the original text and not read it and perhaps misconstrued by inaccurate media reports.
So there was deliberate misinformation and miscommunication to the general public about what the Archbishop's words actually were during his whole tenure as bishop and then Archbishop?
Yes, I mean, in particular, since his call for sanctions against South Africa at the time, calling for boycotts of trade and sports, and so that was something that obviously they wanted to discredit him, what he was calling for.
Right. And so it just speaks to the importance of media, on the importance of getting your message out. If you don't have a way to get your message out unedited and in an authentic fashion, people only know what they're going to hear on state-run television. Was that the case at that time?
Well, absolutely, and I mean it's evidenced even in the U.S. today how people hear what they want to hear on television and on the news from some stations and believe that that's the truth.
This is now the late 80s, right? He won the Nobel Prize in 1984. You joined the team in 1987. Tell me about the climate of, the tenuous security climate around you, the Archbishop, the anti-apartheid freedom fighters. What was it like being with him on a day-to-day basis?
I think, at the time, all of us who were involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and in particular, working for somebody like the Archbishop, personal safety was almost something that we were aware of, but when there's a greater cause, it's almost secondary. But for an example, I have a brother who lives in the same town that I never visited. And one day he said, "Why don't you come around anymore?" And I said to him, I just can't involve you just by pure association. I don't want to put you in danger." Where we were checking our vehicles in the first thing in the morning. When we went to bed, we would look outside. Are there any vehicles that are parked there that we don't recognize? And so that was how we were operating. Heightened security. He did not have personal security. And so essentially staff were the people who looked out for him.
Mm-hmm. And when you said you didn't want to meet your brother, let's just say you met your brother and the security forces found out about it, or the authorities found out about it, what might be the ramifications of that for your brother and for you?
Well, I think just a higher level of scrutiny. I mean, our phones were tapped very definitely. That and there were threats mainly to the Archbishop, where there was a monkey fetus that got hung on the gate outside his home, his official residence. Writing scrawled on the walls, and so it wasn't just the government. There were, I think, forces within communities that felt that the Archbishop was a real threat to South Africa. Mm-hmm. Remembering that white dominance was essentially key to conservatives.
And when you said that your personal safety was secondary to the cause, what was so important about the cause for you as a native South African that you would literally risk your life for?
I think when you realize the injustices and the oppression caused by apartheid, it becomes greater. I think when we realize that the philosophy, the African philosophy of Ubuntu, where we are intertwined with each other's lives, that if I'm hurting or if you're hurting, I hurt as well, because what you feel impacts me. And I think the drive and the sentiment in Ubuntu is so strong in Africa, being able to speak out and care for each other is paramount.
It brings to mind the famous words of Martin Luther King that we're all, I'm just paraphrasing, we're all united in a common garment of destiny, that what affects one affects the other. How much of an influence do you think was Martin Luther King to Archbishop Desmond Tutu and to the nonviolent approach in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa?
I admittedly, I don't know. I think the movement in South Africa was really based on, and the archbishops as well, is on liberation theology, where it is not just okay to be on your knees praying to a God to change things, that the power to change things is within us. And to tie in with that is the Archbishop's deep belief that Christians don't have a monopoly on God, that we are made, all of us, regardless of culture, of religion, we are made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore our brethren in the Muslim and Jewish communities are to be protected and supported as they should be supporting people of other cultures and religions as well.
Interesting. Very universal approach to human rights. I know you initially were studying to be a priest. I know you never actually went into the priesthood. You were never ordained. But do you think that your work in the anti-apartheid movement was an equally important calling, or as a higher calling in some respects? And are there any regrets about your work at that time and working hand in hand with the Archbishop?
Not at all. I do not regret one day of working for him and working against an unjust system. I think we are all priests. I think the only difference between a layperson and a priest is that officially we cannot offer up the sacraments, but we are all priests and we all have a ministry, whatever that is.
I wish that you didn't say you couldn't offer up the sacraments, because I was thinking maybe you could hear my confession after this interview. I think you would be a good person to talk to, just one-on-one, not for the podcast, not for the show, but just a little, just a little intimacy there. But tell me, moving forward, what do you think the most profound experience you had was, given that time and your experience there?
I think realizing that the Archbishop, while he was an amazing speaker and could motivate people, all of that strength came from within through contemplative prayer. He would spend hours. He would dedicate his Friday to a quiet day and just being in prayer. Getting up at 4:00 in the morning to pray. First and foremost, he was a prayerful man, and it's something that I've not quite been able to get to.
4:00 is very early.
But to spend a day fasting and praying, I mean, that was his Fridays.
Wow. And during the rest of the week, he would start quite early in the morning and go often to the end of the day. What was that like, and what condition was he in when he would come home after a day of campaigning or speaking or whatever he was doing?
Well, his daily routine would be 4:00 in the morning, time in prayer, and then he'd go out for a jog.
Really?
Absolutely. And in colder weather, he'd have his treadmill that he'd go on. And then his day would start, depending on what the demands were for the day and what engagements he had, and especially during the time of protests, it would really be drop whatever you're doing and go out to try and mediate or at least try and control crowds who were really frustrated and angry and confrontational when the police were there. And that could be a powder keg just waiting to go off. And that was one of the roles the Archbishop played, was to actually just go and try and mediate and get the crowd to be less volatile, at his own personal safety.
So every day when you folks would go out with him to these situations, no one knew how it was going to end. Nobody knew that, oh, Mandela will be released and he'll be elected president and people will get to vote and South Africa will be welcomed into the family of nations. Nobody knew that was going to happen. Nobody knew it was going to be successful. So every day, was your whole communication team on the same page spiritually, finding courage from your religious faith?
Yes, every day we would have Eucharist. We would have his official home, which is Bishop's Court in Cape Town. There is a chapel, and all the staff would gather, and we would have a Eucharist service to start our day every single day.
And I imagine there were times during the day you would say to yourself, well, I got communion today, so whatever happens is okay. Did you have those moments?
We hope so. I mean, certainly the situations we were in was very tense. And, we would either experience tear gassing. There were times where priests with their collars on, including women priests, would get whipped with rawhide whips. And so that was one thing about the apartheid government. They didn't discriminate when it came to violence. They would have dogs set on them. And yeah, I mean, priests were victims. And I'm not taking away the tremendous courage that the people had in terms of protesting. They were the ones out every single day putting their lives really on the line. And so I don't want to take away from what the black and colored is a acceptable term in South Africa for people of mixed race. The non-white community and some of the white community were involved as well in these protests. So it was really a South Africa as it should have been, protesting against an unjust law.
How important was the international pressure that came in from the boycotts in terms of changing things relatively peacefully, ultimately, in the country?
Boycotts and sanctions played a tremendous role. And those who opposed the call for sanctions and boycotts would say, but it's impacting the people of South Africa. And most of the blacks would respond by saying, we've got nothing to lose. But yes, and some countries were definitely more progressive and advanced than others. Some of the companies in the US were very slow to take on the cause. And some of the previous administrations of the USA were still supporting the South African government. the other big emphasis was on sports boycotts,
Mhm.
where, South Africa is, if you look at the news, it's soccer and rugby and cricket. And when countries basically said you are not welcome to participate in an international match, or countries refused to go to South Africa and refused to play in South Africa, I think that was more where the the South African community would feel the isolation of boycotts.
And so they would be taking a harder look at themselves. Is that the point?
Absolutely. Why would other countries uh, enforce these rules? What are we doing wrong?
Right.
And one of the things I will never forget is of a priest who was a victim of a parcel bomb, and lost both hands and lost an eye.
A
Um,
parcel bomb?
yep, it was sent to his office or his home, and he opened it up, and the bomb went off and lost both hands and an eye. Um, and he was told by somebody, well, I didn't realize, a South African, I didn't realize the impact of apartheid. And his comment was, what country were you living in? I mean, apartheid was so blatant that the excuse of I didn't know what the effects were is just not a valid excuse.
How long did you live there? Were you born in South Africa?
I was born in South Africa. I remained in South Africa until '99 when I left to be with my wife in the USA. And for those who are not aware, I was classified as non-white, so I did not have voting rights. The only people that could vote were the white community, and so I couldn't go to a white school. I couldn't pursue what I wanted to do at a university, which was become a veterinarian, because the university that offered that degree was a whites only university. Um, and so I voted for the first time in '94 when I was 35 years old.
So
Uh,
you were raised there, born and raised, and you weren't allowed to vote until you were 35 years old. That's pretty incredible. From an American perspective, that's pretty incredible. And tell us about your wife and your mixed race. Your wife is Caucasian, is that correct?
yes, she's Armenian. Um, so yes, Caucasian. And so I came across on what is called a fiance visa. I had 90 days to marry from the moment I came through customs and immigration. Um, and and so we married in Hingham uh, by the Archbishop.
First of all, that marriage would have been illegal in South Africa, correct?
Well, not just marriage. In the apartheid era, even if I went out with a white woman, uh, I could get arrested.
So you met where you were outside of South Africa. You met at the airport, I think you told me.
We met at JFK.
That's a great meeting place. That's like a big pickup place. I don't know if you knew that, Stewart, but JFK Airport's like a huge pickup place.
Who needs the online
Right.
dating services when you can just hang out at JFK?
Right. And so when you got married, obviously you obviously hit it off very well and you're still together. But the Archbishop came from South Africa to Hingham, Massachusetts
No,
to perform the ceremony. Is that right?
no, he was actually based in at that time he was a visiting lecturer at Emory. So he was in the US, but he did he did travel to Massachusetts to conduct our wedding.
Okay, so he was stationed at Emory University in the United States. Is that in Georgia?
Yes.
Okay, and then he came up to Hingham to perform the service. And what was that like, having a Nobel Peace Prize winner perform the marital service for you and your wife?
Well, it was funny because I was just reminiscing with the priest at the time of the church. Um, my wife isn't a churchgoer, and she had to do all of the arrangements. So here's this woman out of the blue calling up this priest in Hingham and saying, uh, we'd like to get married in your church. We don't actually attend your church. And also, we don't want you to marry us because we've got another priest coming to marry us. And so I asked him, what did you think? And he said, well, I just kind of went along with it to see how it would end up. And so my wife did say to him that the priest who would marry us was the Archbishop, and even then he kind of took that with a pinch of salt. And we didn't, other than the priest and our immediate families, we didn't actually share that the Archbishop was going to be there. He was involved with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission at the time, and I think we would have been devastated if anything had to have happened to him while he was with us. We were able to get to state police, plainclothes state police, to accompany him throughout his stay here in Massachusetts.
Well, Stewart, it's great to talk to you today. It's just a wonderful story, and it certainly gives me hope about the future. Everybody thinks the time they're living in is the worst ever, but clearly you must have thought that back in the 80s and 90s in South Africa, but it has changed for the better, which is remarkable and so hopeful. What would your advice be to people in terms of keeping that legacy alive and doing what they can?
Thank you, Jimmy. It's a good way to, I think, conclude, because I wrote a piece for the Friday before the Archbishop's funeral. The Episcopal Church at the time, I visited the church where I got married, and the Archbishop was there. At noon, the churches rang the bells. They would toll the bells, every one toll every few seconds. So it was a very mournful ringing of the bell, signifying a significant death in the community. And I wrote this after I spent time just in thoughtful prayer and meditation myself, which is unusual for me. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read this so I don't mess up what I'm saying.
Please do.
I could so easily repeat words already spoken more eloquently by others. But what I know of him is that words were meaningless unless there was an action that supported their intent. I'm not a holy person and have no skills to offer, you might say. And I can hear the Arch's response. Do your little bit of good wherever you are. It is those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world. We can absolutely do good in the world, but why not start in your own part of the world first? Pick up that piece of trash that somebody else has tossed aside and do good for the environment and conservation of wildlife. Reach out to somebody in need. We are all made for goodness, love, and compassion, says the Archbishop. Our lives are transformed so much as the as the world is when we live with these beliefs. Get involved in your communities and correct the injustices that you've ignored by thinking somebody else is better equipped than I am to deal with that. Volunteer your time to help organizations in their mission and become the person that we know we all want to be. So I think, in a way, that is how to keep the Archbishop alive, is through our own actions and deeds and words.
Well, thank you so much, Stewart. It's advice that everybody can put into practice. It's not that hard to do. Everybody, so many of our listeners are already doing that. I know you're already doing that in your own life. One of the things with this podcast and this show we hope to do, there'll always be calls to action. I know that on February 2nd, you had mentioned at the church on Tremont Street in Boston, Massachusetts, there'll be a service for the memorial service at 6 o'clock for the Archbishop, and it will also be live streamed. Is that correct?
It'll be live streamed, and the information can be found on the cathedral's website.
St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral on Tremont Street in Boston, 6 o'clock, February 2nd. You can show up in person, or you can watch it on live stream on the web.
Coincidentally, it's 2/2, the date 2/2/2022.
Archbishop Tutu being memorialized on 2/2/2022 at the St. Paul's Cathedral on Tremont Street in Boston. Are you going to be there, Stewart?
Yes, I will. I've actually been asked to speak as well.
Oh, great. Great. Well, I look forward to hearing your words there. Thank you so much for taking the time today to help us remember and shed light on this wonderful man, a prophet of our generation. So thank you so much, Stewart. I will see you soon. I'll see you live stream, because the organization for today's podcast that we're helping is Metro West Legal Services, who help people who don't have the means to hire legal defense, to help them with housing and education and healthcare and all the day-to-day challenges that people have regardless of income level, and it's even harder when the income level is not there. So thank you so much, Metro West Legal Services. In the spirit of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, we'll be working for you as well. Thank you, Stewart. I hope to see you on the 2nd.
Thank you, Jimmy.